his hunger strike outside the Foreign Office after 21 days. He's been striking to put pressure on the government to help free his wife, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who's been detained in Iran for 5 years. He's criticised Prime Minister Boris Johnson, saying he shouldn't walk away from the promises that he made.
He hasn't dealt adequately with Nazanin's case for years. He hasn't honoured his promises, and we live with those consequences. You know, my job is to keep going for Gabriella. We probably hoped we'd get a breakthrough doing this. We haven't yet. I didn't want to go out in an ambulance. I wanted to walk out with my head held high.
Britney Spears' conservatorship has terminated after nearly 14 years. The pop superstar has been fighting to end the complex legal agreement she was placed under in 2008 that restricted her personal and professional life. Celebrities have shared their support. Paris Hilton tweeted that the ruling was long overdue, and singer Cher celebrated the star's freedom. Valentino Rossi will retire from MotoGP after the Valencia Grand Prix tomorrow. The Italian, who races with the number 46, is a 9-time world champion. Rossi, who's known as the Doctor, is the only rider to have started 400 races. During his career, the veteran has stood on the podium 235 times, with the first one in Austria in 1996. You are right up to date now. Back to Ray Mears Live.
At 10 minutes to midday on the 11th of November 1943, a lorry pulled up in the main square of Oyonnax, a small town in southeast France. 30 young men jumped down. They were wearing uniforms, they were armed, and on their shoulders they had tricolours. These were Maquis resistance fighters. They immediately deployed into 3 groups and seized the police station, the post office and the barracks, without a shot being fired. 5 more lorries then pulled up, also filled with Maquis, and at 12 midday precisely, they formed up and marched to the War Memorial, where they laid a wreath in the shape of the Cross of Lorraine, with the message, "To the victors of 1914-1918, from the victors of tomorrow." The last post was played. There was a minute's silence, and then the assembled crowd found the courage to sing the Marseillaise. For a brief few minutes, freedom was brought to the town, and the Nazi propaganda that cast the Maquis as thieves and brigands was forever dispelled. The parade was risky and incredibly foolhardy, the Maquis revealing their faces to the scrutiny of any collaborators who may have been present in the crowd. And sadly, 3 weeks later, the mayor and 2 of his deputies were shot in reprisal. But that courageous act of defiance saw the ranks of the resistance swell with recruits, and perhaps most importantly of all, it signalled that France was still fighting. It won respect from around the world. On the eve of Remembrance Day, as we pause to remember those who gave their lives to preserve the freedoms that we enjoy today, I cannot help wondering, where has the respect gone? All too often, I see rubbish thrown into the countryside. Where is respect for our country? I read of politicians mired in financial corruption. Where is respect for their office and the electorate? People hide behind the anonymity of social media, trolling others in a way they would never do in person. And COP26, respect for the planet? Only time will tell. Those Maquis in 1943 knew what they were fighting for. They understood the importance of respect, that it is the bedrock of civilization and of our freedom. Respect has to be earned. It requires selflessness and dedication to a higher cause. With me this evening on my panel, former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik and GB News' very own Inaya Folarin Iman. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Inaya, it's a significant weekend, a weekend for reflection. Do you worry sometimes that not enough people do reflect and remember and respect anymore?
I definitely think that is an increasing challenge. I think we're in a time of huge political polarisation, and so many things, as you've rightfully mentioned, that generations before fought and actually died for seem to be increasingly dismissed as unimportant. One of those things is democracy. You know, we saw during the Brexit referendum the way in which democracy was essentially tossed to the side. We see that with freedom of speech, something that so many people across the world, do not have the ability and right to actually say what they believe to be true and actually express themselves increasingly in institutions, on university campuses, and in so many areas of society. That is another thing that people are hostile to. And I think that's incredibly sad.
Lembit, I mentioned in my monologue that the behaviour of MPs who haven't covered themselves in glory over the last 2 weeks, do you think they respect their jobs and their responsibilities? I mean, this week there's been a lot of talk about COP26 and the new climate deal going right to the wire. Are the politicians really there to save the planet, or are they wanting to be seen in the right places?
Two parts there. I think most politicians in all parties do start for the right reason. My experience is that power doesn't really corrupt, but it does corrode. And you start taking shortcuts, and in the end, you end up in a mess. Now, the COP26 is a really good example of this. I simply don't accept the fundamental premise that CO2 is wrecking the climate. And just in terms of what we've been talking about there, and Anaya's point, you're not allowed to say it. For all the freedom that we fought for all the wars we fought, you now can actually be ostracized, you can be cancelled just for the point of view that you have. And it's an insane situation. It's almost like we take for granted that we won those wars, but we don't have to follow up with the principle. So I would summarize it.
I take your point, and I think that obviously we should always be able to question and to debate these things. But I mean, the body of science now that is standing behind the evidence for climate change is really is astonishing. I mean, the thing that really struck me, of course, was this week this astonishing footage from Tuvalu, where you had the foreign minister Simon Kofe standing up to his knees in the ocean on what was formerly part of their islands. And these people, their islands are just 2 meters above sea level. For them, global warming and climate change are real. They're a life-threatening event.
You may not know this, but Tuvalu's surface area is going up, not down. It's gained 74 hectares. I have to check exactly the length of time, but its actual land area is increasing. Classic example. It's a good example that you raised there. But in a world where freedom of speech is under threat, these stunts seem to usurp the right to dissent. I went to a competition or an award ceremony called the Contrarian of the Year Award, won by Toby Young this year. And the theme, this was during the week, and the theme there was, you're not allowed to speak out. Now, I thought your monologue was great. I didn't actually know some of what you said there. But that's how serious freedom of expression has been when we fought wars over it. My concern is now that we've gone soft on it. So we can have an argument about the climate change debate, but one thing I really feel strongly about is whether you believe that there's a climate emergency, whether you believe the human race is responsible or not, we should at least be able to have that conversation. And I feel very concerned that we are losing the freedom of speech due to the tyranny of the majority and virtue signalling, which is what I think COP26 has been all about.
It's very interesting. I wonder whether you have any sort of vested interest in this, and if so, they should be declared really, because I've spent time with Pacific Islanders. I don't find them to be in any way extremists or people who would exaggerate. They know very clearly where they live, right in the middle of the Pacific, and they suffer cyclones and all sorts of problems. What do you think?
So I do think that climate change is a problem, and I think there are many different potential dangers that can come about from whether that's rising sea levels and various different forms of deforestation. But I do think that the reality is the climate has changed in many different ways. So at some point we were living through, as human beings, an ice age. So the idea that we should kind of capture one moment in society and then, panic about that, when the reality is when we had much less development, when we were actually practically living from hand to mouth, subjugated by nature, we're still able to respond to and adapt to the different challenges that exist. And the nature of climate itself is it's a complex system that is something you have to look at from a very vast time frame. So any person in their own lifetime that has seen some changes happen, I wouldn't necessarily see as an example of climate change, because oftentimes you really have to look at it over decades, if not hundreds of years, rather than just looking at it in a few years' time. That's often just weather changes. I do think climate change is an important issue, but I think the way in which it's being responded to, which is essentially shutting down debate, as Lempit rightfully mentioned, in a very anti-democratic way, where the public are kept out of conversations, to me makes me question the real intentions behind a lot of these conferences and conversations.
I'm totally with an eye on this. Vested interest. I do have a vested interest. I work with the Motorcycle Action Group, and the Motorcycle Action Group has come to the view that it's wrong to ban the sale of petrol-powered motorcycles in 2035. But actually, it's cause and effect here. I've been very powerfully advocating within that movement that it wouldn't be appropriate to ban motorcycle petrol engines. But beyond that, I don't get funding from the environmental lobby. In fact, I'd rather be on the other side. It would be easier. My life is much more difficult because of the line I've taken. Now, in terms of what Inaya said, this is really interesting. I bet you that you and most viewers didn't know Tuvalu's getting bigger. You probably also don't know that there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest the Antarctic ice sheets are increasing as well. And this point, Inaya made, the one question I asked, actually on GBNews a week or two ago, of environmentalists was, do you think that we can stop climate change? The answer was they didn't answer. Because in order to stop climate change, you have to explain what caused the medieval warm period, the Roman warm period, which was long before the Industrial Revolution, what caused the Little Ice Age, which stopped in 1850. We make a difference. I take this issue seriously. I first had something published in 1980 on this subject, believe it or not, when I was 15. So I've followed this for 4 decades. But the two things come together, the freedom of speech and the science. And what we're not allowing people to do is have that debate. You do get cancelled out on a lot of the media just because you're regarded as a climate change denier, which very, very presciently this weekend sounds a bit like Holocaust denier, and it's supposed to. It's meant to be offensive.
I think, I can't disagree on that. I mean, you saw it similarly, people saying COVID denier and lockdown denier. I think that there's this very alarmist and extreme rhetoric which is used to silence debate, because most people, when you're faced with people essentially saying that there is only one route, and if you don't follow these specific set of measures, then you were either going to deny, you're either going to die, or you are essentially equivalent to some of the most horrendous acts in human history, then that is a way of enforcing conformity. And I care about the possibility and potential of huge environmental destruction and shifts going on. And to me, in order to deal with that, we need to be able to have a level head. We need to be able to separate the politics from the actual issue and be able to approach this in a way that's level-headed and sensible. And I think ramping up the rhetoric, ramping up the panic, I think is only serving to create a whole new generation of young people, many people of my peers and younger, who feel completely fatalistic and anxious about the future and paralyzed about the possibility of growing up, because they're told that the world they're going to inherit is one of fear, destruction, and danger. And I think that's a really terrifying and sad message, I think, to send to young people.
I agree with you. I think the anxiety that we're foisting upon the next generation is inappropriate, and it's a dereliction of our own ability to cope with the issues. But of course, it's not just about climate change. It's not just about the warming planet. It's also about pollution, which is I think that's clearly undeniable.
I think most people would agree with that.
And of course, the loss of biodiversity
and plastics in the ocean.
Plastics in the ocean, and these are serious issues, and we have to address them. And I really hope that at COP26 that we will actually see some action, as everyone has been saying. The eyes of the world are on it, and Yeah, I hold out hope. I mean, for me, I've witnessed, the effects of global warming. I've witnessed the effects of pollution in different parts of the world, and I've also, sadly, been witness to a lot of incidents of poaching of endangered species, which are horrific. And if I could just bottle some of those moments and the emotions that you feel when you're confronted with reality, it would be so much easier to deal with these things.
No, I do understand that, but just quickly, that what I would say is that, in all honesty, and I'm going to be brutally honest here, I watched a video very recently of a young girl being effectively sold into sexual slavery in Afghanistan, because of the poverty that they face. And to me, if I had to choose between eradicating extreme human suffering and poverty and perhaps, polar bears, I probably would choose the human suffering. And I do worry about the prioritization of environmental questions over the rapid development economically and politically of those millions of people across the planet that are living in abject poverty. And I don't think that's a very cute and perspective to put forward, but I worry that this is supplanting the global importance of actually eradicating poverty.
Well, of course, the two are very tightly linked, and poverty is also a result of our changes to the environment. We see in many parts of Africa, of course, drought and famine caused by changes in climate. The loss of trees, the loss of biodiversity means the loss of moisture from the soil. These two things are very tightly linked.
But I would say that countries are much better placed to respond to those challenges if they're not in abject poverty. So just as us, we can respond to rising sea levels and things like that because we have the technological and economic development to do so.
Of course, that's been the nub of the debate at COP26, is how to help the developing nations who have trouble funding changes in the way they're doing things. How do we fund that? And of course, I think we should all be striving to create greater equality in terms of financial incomes around the world. It would be to all of our benefits.
Well, no, I
can I just add one more thing? And I made an interesting point about polar bears. Once again, I'm a scientist, basically. I ended up in politics almost by accident, but I'm fundamentally a scientist. So I look at the data. There's a book by a woman called Susan Crockford, and she shows that the polar bear population is at a record level across the last 50 years. But you wouldn't think so, based on how it's been covered. It's probably to do, well, I won't go into the details, but essentially, polar bear population is going up, but it's a poster animal for decline. Another thing is, quite clear, Patrick Moore, who helped to found Greenpeace, has written a book about these things. And he shows that the warmer the ocean, the more biodiversity there is. So what we're actually now doing is we've got this fake science, to use a Donald Trump phrase, and it's all pervading. Now, I always say this, and I'm interested to have your first-hand perspective as well, and I take that very seriously. But the way I look at it is, if COP26 was about using our resources frugally, then I think all three of us would agree. I think everyone should agree. If we're going to be around for a few thousand years more, we don't want to squander it all in the next 100 years. That's irresponsible. But when it comes to the science debate, it is a prima facie example of totalitarianism, where there's the eco way or there's the highway. And it ties right back into your monologue and where we started. People like me should have the right to say this, instead of finding it extremely difficult to go on to some stations, creditably not GBNews, but other stations, because they don't have to provide balance. That is an abdication of responsibility when it comes to free debate, the thing we fought the wars for, and the scientific method. I could be wrong, but then let's test it instead of simply...
I agree with you. I would like to hear just scientists who to give us the facts, who are not coming from any particular direction. We'd like to hear from you on this show, and clearly this is a debate which has got some legs. So please keep your tweets and emails coming into us. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. I'll get to as many of your messages as I can later in the show. After the break, we'll talk more about COP26, and we'll ask an expert if the summit was more about ego than eco.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button. And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. We're going to go straight to Glasgow now, live, where Alok Sharma is speaking about COP26.
These decisions conclude the outstanding elements of the Paris Rulebook, enabling full and effective implementation of the Paris Agreement. And they place an unprecedented focus on the issue of loss and damage. Collectively, I believe the decisions you are about to make demonstrate the continued relevance and leadership of this multilateral process. They promote inclusive climate action, recognizing the important role played by civil society, indigenous peoples, local communities, youth, and other stakeholders. They complement the impressive commitments and actions of all those who joined us in Glasgow, driving progress on coal, cars, cash, and trees. We met here under extraordinary circumstances, and the negotiations have been far from easy. I can tell you that definitely. But I have been struck by the determination that you have all shown to get our work done, to forge consensus on an unprecedented agenda, and ultimately agree something meaningful for our people and our planet. Each and every one of you and the nations you represent has stepped up here in Glasgow, agreeing to do what it takes to keep 1.5 alive. And for that, I am infinitely grateful. It is now my great honor to take us through the formal adoption proceedings. I now declare open the 12th meeting of COP26. The order in which the agenda items will be taken up is posted on the screen. So first, I now invite the COP to adopt the decision entitled Glasgow Climate Pact, contained in document FCCC/CP/2021/L13. I see China is seeking an intervention. I invite China to take the floor.
谢谢主席。根据刚才中国、印度、南非、玻利维亚代表立场相近发展中国家以及其他一些发展中国家的关切，我们与相关缔约方和有关方面进行了沟通磋商，本着推动大会取得成功的目的，找到了一个建设性的解决方案，具体内容已经提交主席，感谢各方展现的灵活性，谢谢。
Thank you, China. I see India wishes to take the floor. India, you have the floor.
Mr. President, thank you very much to provide an opportunity to us. On the text of para 20 of discussion of 1/COP26 and para 36 of the draft decision of 1/CMA3, we, after discussion with the presidency and various stakeholders in the other countries, the next text we propose and will be read as follow. If you permit me, I read that. Okay. Now I propose call upon parties to accelerate the development, deployment, and dissemination of technologies and adoption of policies to transition towards low-emission energy systems, including by rapidly scaling up deployment of clean power generation and energy efficiency measures, including accelerating effort to phase down unabated coal power and phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, while providing targeted support to the poorest and the most vulnerable in line with national circumstances and recognizing the need for support towards a just transition. Thank you.
Thank you to China, India for their interventions. Dear delegates, you have a revised proposal for the paragraphs that were set out by Minister Yadav. Could I ask whether distinguished delegates, having heard the proposal, is this proposal agreeable to you? I have two interventions. I have an intervention from Switzerland. Switzerland, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the EIG, we would like to express our profound disappointment that the language that we have agreed on coal and fossil fuel subsidies has been further watered down as a result of an intransparent process. Let us be clear, we do not need to phase down, but to phase out coal and fossil fuel subsidies. We were told in the stocktake meeting that no changes can be adopted to the presented text when we try to close a loophole in the market decision. The EIG does not want to risk that we leave Glasgow without an outcome. Therefore, we did not oppose this additional last-minute change weakening the outcome of Glasgow, but we are disappointed both about the process and about this last-minute change. This will not bring us closer to 1.5, but make it more difficult to reach it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Switzerland, for your intervention. The European Union wishes to take the floor. I give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is no secret to this gathering that the European Union would have wanted to go even further than the initial text in the cover text on coal. This is a consequence of our own painful experience with coal. We all know that European wealth was built on coal, and if we don't get rid of coal, European death will also be built on coal. We know full well that coal has no future. And this is what we're working on with our own plans to put an end to coal in Europe in the foreseeable future. Having said that, and then of course it will be no surprise to you that what was just read out to us is a further disappointment. Not because we want to be right, but because we know that the longer you take to get rid of coal, the more burden you put on our natural environment, but also the more burden you put on your economy, because coal is simply not a smart economic proposition either. That's why we want to speed up the exit out of coal. Now, having said all that, if I look at the conclusions we are going to be drawing today, we are going to work bloody hard on getting rid of coal, and I believe this conclusion will help us work in that direction. The European Union will be strongly committed to that, not just within the European Union, but also with our partners worldwide. And for us, the model we have found, together with the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany and France, on South Africa, should be the template of how we help other coal-producing countries to rid themselves of this fossil. And that is, Mr. President, what we will want to do in the years to come. So, having now expressed my disappointment, I want to reiterate what I said in my earlier intervention. This should not stop us from deciding today on what, even before you've read everything, I have to say is a historic decision under your leadership, and you can be very proud of that, Mr. President.
I thank the European Union for their intervention. I now give the floor to Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and also for the great effort you made on the text. We fully align with the statement made by Switzerland on behalf of the EIG. Liechtenstein is deeply disappointed that this COP26 was not held as a fully inclusive and transparent process. Small countries were not equally represented in the bilateral consultations with the COP presidency, and we believe weakening the language regarding the phase-out of fossil fuels, especially coal, is nor ambitious nor in line with reaching the 1.5 degrees temperature goal. For the greater good, we must swallow this bitter pill. Thank you, and back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Liechtenstein, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Mexico. Mexico, you have the floor.
Mexico fully aligns with the statement made by Switzerland on behalf of the EIG. We believe we have been sidelined in a non-transparent and non-inclusive process. At the stocktake, we already compromised to what we perceived was an agreement by parties, even if we were unhappy with the text. But now we learn that there are even further changes that we were not being made aware. We all have remaining concerns, but we're told we could not reopen the text. Mexico, for example, believes the language on human rights should have been strengthened and are very, very disappointed that such demands were not heard, while others can still ask to water down our promises. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Mexico for that intervention. I now call Marshall Islands to take the floor. Marshall Islands, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. On behalf of the Marshall Islands, I wish to read into the record our profound disappointment with the change in the language on coal from phase out to phase down. I ask that this be reflected in the report of this meeting. This commitment on coal had been a bright spot in this package. It was one of the things we were hoping to carry out of here and back home with pride, and it hurts deeply to see that bright spot dim. We accept this change with the greatest reluctance, We do so only, and I really want to stress, only, because there are critical elements of this package that people in my country need as a lifeline for their future. Thank you.
Thank you, Marshall Islands, for your intervention. I will now take an intervention from Fiji. Fiji, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. A few days ago, in fact about 4 days ago, when we talked about some language on loss and damage, we were told that we were introducing something at the last minute. It's rather ironic that just about 2 hours ago we discussed the text, and now there's an amendment being made to that, and that I would call last minute, without any due process being followed. I think the point of the matter is that 1.5 degree has always been a red line for us, in particular low-lying countries, island states. What we'd like to express, of course, is not just our astonishment, but our immense disappointment in the manner in which this has been introduced. And secondly, that we seem to be dealing with these various clauses in a disjointed fashion. There's no confluence between the earlier clauses prior to this that talks about the 1.5 degree, and indeed the impact on our ability to reach 1.5 degree by having now what we call a phase down, which in fact has no demonstrable measurements, no methodology as to how we will measure this phase down. And I think that is critically important, and we need to remember that. And I hope all the other countries that have the capacity and the ability to be able to do so will in fact do so. Because small island states like ours do not have the capacity, we're reliant on all the other good countries that believe in phasing out coal will do that for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiji, for your intervention. And now I will take an intervention from Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you, Mr. President. The 39 leaders of the Alliance of Small Island States in September signed a declaration to urge major emitters, particularly the G20, to phase out all fossil fuel subsidies by 2023. We were disappointed to find the addition of the inefficiency from the G20 language, but can accept that this is as far as we can go today. The challenges with securing today's historic commitment for the UNFCCC historic to phase out inefficient fossil fuels, despite knowing that this is factually required to stay on a 1.5 degree global pathway, deeply concerns AOSIS. The challenges of the energy transition are real, and we recognize that the political risks that come with the climate change response and the monopolistic nature of the fossil fuel industry in today's world are real. We need to double down on retraining workforces so that this is an easy decision to make going forward. We appreciate the outcome of today, and we can accept the changes, although we reiterate the challenges around the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Antigua and Barbuda, for your intervention. May I just say to all delegates, I apologize for the way this process has unfolded, and I'm deeply sorry. I also understand the deep disappointment. But I think, as you have noted, it's also vital that we protect this package. Delegates, please. Delegates, thank you, friends. We need to proceed. Thank you very much. So given what interventions we've had, I propose that the revised proposal is adopted as orally amended. A revised version, a written version, will be issued shortly. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. So I now invite the COP to consider agenda item 5, reporting from parties not included in Annex 1 to the Convention. This item was considered by the SBI, and I want to thank the chair of the SBI and parties for their hard work and for forwarding to the COP the progress of their work on the revision of the terms of reference of the consultation group of experts, following which I undertook further consultations. I therefore invite the COP to adopt the draft decision entitled Revised Terms of Reference of the Consultative Group of Experts contained in document FCCC/2021/L12. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Dear delegates, please stay in your seats as we will be now convening the CMA immediately. So the 12th meeting of the COP is suspended, and I now declare open the 12th meeting of CMA 3. The order in which the agenda items will be taken up is posted on the screen. I now invite the CMA to adopt the decision entitled Glasgow Climate Pact contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L16. And at this point, I recall the oral amendment made to the decision that was just adopted under the COP, document L13, and I propose that the amendment also be applied to CMA document FCCC/PA/CMA/L16, and I propose that this decision be adopted as amended. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I see a number of parties would like to intervene at this point, so I'd now like to give the floor to Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you, Mr. President. AOSIS requests that the COP President firmly acknowledge that the G77 and China position on loss and damage that was tabled this session. The common position was and still is to establish the Glasgow Loss and Damage Facility under the financial mechanism and to lay out a process with workshops, technical meetings, technical papers, submissions from parties and inclusion of other stakeholders, as well as inputs to include the work of the WIM ExCom and its experts, including on action and support. The aim was to consultatively define the facility and make a recommendation to COP27. What we have before us in one CMA 3 is one standalone dialogue with no clear destination. AOSIS expresses our grievance with this text. Our group strongly considered requesting the deletion of paragraphs 73 and 74 in 1 CMA 3 because of this inadequacy. AOSIS, in the interest of reaching a consensus, will accept the text as gavelled, as it stands, with the clear understanding that this dialogue is a key step towards the creation of a loss and damage finance facility. We firmly believe that the dialogue should lead to a conclusion that the new loss and damage finance facility will be adopted at the next COP. This is the basis on which we understand the decision before us. We request assurances from the COP presidency that this is the interpretation in our acceptance of this decision, including recording this interpretation in these proceedings.
Thank you, Antigua and Barbuda. I take note of the statement from Antigua and Barbuda. I see there is an intervention from Venezuela. Venezuela, I invite you to take the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. Quería tomar la oportunidad de intervenir para no para hacer referencia a la decisión que recién se aprobó sobre el Acuerdo de París, la decisión principal de la conferencia del Acuerdo de París. Nosotros no nos oponemos a esta adopción, pero sí queríamos hacer un breve comentario. Señor presidente, hicimos todo el esfuerzo posible para tratar de converger sobre la incidencia de las medidas coercitivas unilaterales en la implementación del Acuerdo de París. Muchos países se sensibilizaron y están conscientes de las implicaciones de las medidas coercitivas y de las medidas unilaterales en la acción climática. Y para ello, señor presidente, queríamos proponerle para seguir afianzando y seguir abordando este tema, que podamos tener un espacio de discusión sobre cómo las medidas coercitivas unilaterales están afectando la implementación del Acuerdo de París y la acción climática. Nosotros desde Venezuela venimos trabajando en esta vinculación desde el año 2020 y 2021. Hemos reunido un grupo importante de expertos de reconocimiento internacional, de sectores académicos y jurídicos. He oído en estas plenarias que hay muchos estados partes sensibilizados con respecto al tema de los derechos humanos, y hay una vinculación muy profunda con respecto a la incidencia de las medidas coercitivas unilaterales en los derechos humanos y en los derechos ambientales. Yo estoy abierta a la colaboración de este proceso y de esta convención, y me gustaría que durante su presidencia pudiéramos tener la oportunidad de seguir trabajando en esta vinculación. Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Venezuela. We take note of your statement. And can I just go back and confirm to Antigua and Barbuda that the record of their statement will be put into the proceedings. So seeing no other requests to intervene, I invite the CMA to now consider Agenda Item 12, matters relating to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. This item was referred to the Subster for its consideration. I thank the Chair of the Subster for his hard work on the matters relating to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and for forwarding recommendations to the CMA, following which I undertook further consultations. I now invite the CMA to consider Sub-Agenda Item 12A, Guidance on Cooperative Approaches, referred to in Article 6, Paragraph 2 of the Paris Agreement. I now invite the CMA to adopt the draft decisions entitled Guidance on Cooperative Approaches, referred to in Article 6, Paragraph 2 of the Paris Agreement, contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L18. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Delegates, I now invite the CMA to consider Sub-Agenda Item 12B, Rules, Modalities and Procedures for the mechanism established by Article 6, Paragraph 4 of the Paris Agreement. I now invite the CMA to adopt the draft decisions entitled Rules, Modalities and Procedures for the mechanism established by Article 6, Paragraph 4 of the Paris Agreement, contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L19. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMA to consider Sub-Agenda Item 12C, Work Programme under the Framework for Non-Market Approaches, referred to in Article 6, paragraph 8 of the Paris Agreement. I now invite the CMA to adopt the draft decisions entitled Work Programme under the Framework for Non-Market Approaches referred to in Article 6, paragraph 8 of the Paris Agreement, contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L20. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMA to consider Agenda Item 5, methodological issues relating to the Enhanced Transparency Framework for Action and Support referred to in Article 13 of the Paris Agreement. This item was considered by the Subster. I thank the Chair of the Subster for his hard work on the matter of the methodological issues relating to the Enhanced Transparency Framework and for forwarding a recommendation to the CMA, following which I undertook further consultations on this matter. I note, given the adoption of Article 6, parties would retain information that is shaded in Annex 2 and delete Table 5 in that annex. In addition, the text in square brackets in Annexes 4, 6, and 7 in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L12 will be retained. I now invite the CMA to adopt the draft decisions entitled Guidance for Operationalizing the Modalities, Procedures and Guidelines for the Enhanced Transparency Framework referred to in Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L12. May I take it that the document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L21 as orally revised is acceptable? Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the CMA to return to Agenda Sub-Item 3B, Report of the Subsidiary Body for Implementation. The matter of common timeframes for nationally determined contributions was considered by the SBI. I thank the Chair of the SBI for her hard work on the issue and for forwarding the outcome of its work to the CMA, following which I undertook further consultations on this matter. I now invite the CMA to adopt the draft decision entitled Common Timeframes for Nationally Determined Contributions referred to in Article 4, Paragraph 10 of the Paris Agreement, contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L12. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Dear delegates, please stay in your seats as we will be convening the CMP immediately. The 12th meeting of the CMA is suspended. I now declare open the 10th meeting of CMP 16. I now invite the CMP to adopt the decision entitled Glasgow Climate Pact, contained in document FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/L5. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the CMP to consider Agenda Item 5, matters relating to the Clean Development Mechanism. Parties may recall that a contact group was established, co-chaired by Mr. Yao Asafo of Ghana and Mr. Kashuhisa Wakotsu of Japan. I thank the co-chairs for their hard work. I now invite the CMP to adopt the draft decision entitled Guidance Relating to the Clean Development Mechanism contained in document FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/L6. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. We will return. I see that Ukraine has asked for the floor. Ukraine, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, Mr. President, I make the statement on behalf of Ukraine and Kazakhstan. The transitional measures agreed for CDM, in combination with the decisions on Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement, give a head start to some developing countries and not to others. We're deeply disappointed in this outcome. We hear different things from parties on whether this oversight was intentional or accidental. We firmly believe that all parties should have equal access to the instruments of Article 6.4 in transitional period. In the spirit of compromise and consensus, we have accepted the text presented by the Presidency, and we call on our partners to address the disparities created by this text, whatever was the reason for their existence. Thank you.
Ukraine, thank you for your intervention and thank you for your consideration. Colleagues, we will return to the election of the Executive Board at the closing of the CMP. I invite the CMP to consider Agenda Item 7, matters relating to the Adaptation Fund. I invite the CMP to consider Sub-Item 7A, report of the Adaptation Fund Board for 2020 and 2021. At our first meeting, a contact group was established to be co-chaired by Ms. Claudia Keller from Germany and Mr. Ali Waqas Malik from Pakistan. Thank you, Ms. Keller and Mr. Malik, for your hard work. I'm pleased to report that the group has produced a draft decision for adoption by the CMP. I invite the CMP to adopt the draft decision entitled Report of the Adaptation Fund Board for 2020 and 2021, contained in document FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/L3. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the CMP to consider Sub-Item 7B, fourth review of the Adaptation Fund. This item was considered by the SBI, and I thank the chair of the SBI and parties for their hard work and for forwarding a recommendation to the CMP. I invite the CMP to adopt the draft decision entitled Fourth Review of the Adaptation Fund, contained in document FCCC/SBI/2021/L19. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Dear delegates, please stay in your seats as we will be convening the CMA immediately. The 10th meeting of the CMP is suspended. I now resume the 12th meeting of CMA 3. I now invite the CMA to consider Agenda Item 7, Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage Associated with Climate Change Impacts. This item was referred to the SUBSTA and the SBI for its consideration. I thank the chairs of the SUBSTA and the SBI for forwarding their recommendation to the CMA, following which I undertook further consultations on this matter. I now invite the CMA to adopt the draft decision entitled The Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage Associated with Climate Change Impacts, contained in document FCCC/CMA3/2021/L22. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMA to consider Agenda Item 4, matters relating to adaptation. Sub-Item 4A, reports of the Adaptation Committee for 2019 and 2020, and sub-item 4B, report of the Adaptation Committee 2021 and the work on the Global Goal on Adaptation. This item was considered by the SBSTA and the SBI. I thank the chairs of the SBSTA and the SBI for forwarding their recommendation to the CMA, following which I undertook further consultations on this matter. I now invite the CMA to adopt the decision entitled Report of the Adaptation Committee for 2019, 2020 and 2021 contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L15. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMA to adopt the draft decision entitled Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh Work Programme on the Global Goal on Adaptation, contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L14. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Colleagues, Maldives have asked to take the floor. Maldives, you have the floor.
Excellencies, COP President Alok Sharma, thank you so much for getting us all through this process in what has been one of the most challenging times the world has ever seen. Firstly, we welcome the agreement by parties and are proud of the establishment and launch of the work program on the Global Goal on Adaptation. As one of the most vulnerable countries to the climate crisis, the Maldives sees this as a great achievement in adaptation, and I am proud to have co-facilitated together with Minister Teresa Ribera from Spain the agreement by parties on the establishment and immediate launch of this work program. We need to set this work program on an ambitious footing, and that is why the Maldives proposes to have an in-person launch workshop for the work program. This launch workshop will serve as a science policy interface for an in-person initial information exchange at the outset of the work program. On behalf of the government of Maldives, I communicate our offer and readiness to host this launch work program. Thank you, Mr. President.
I see there's a further intervention from Egypt. Egypt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to welcome the announcement just made by the Minister from the Maldives regarding the offer of the Maldives to host the first workshop launching the work of the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh Work Programme on the Global Goal on Adaptation. Likewise, Mr. President, it is my pleasure to also offer to host an in-person workshop under the work program in Egypt. This is really a very important achievement that we've made here in Glasgow and would like to move forward as quickly as possible. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Egypt, for your intervention. And could I, on behalf of all of us, thank both the Maldives and Egypt for your offers to host workshops. I would now like to invite the CMA to consider Agenda Item 8, Matters Relating to Finance. For Sub-Item 8A, the contact group was co-chaired by Mr. Gard Linseth from Norway and Mr. Richard Uyungi from Tanzania. For Sub-Item 8B and C, the contact groups were co-chaired by Ambassador Diane Black-Lane from Antigua and Barbuda and Mr. Toru Sugua from Japan. For Sub-Item 8D, the contact group was co-chaired by Mr. Ali Waqas Malik from Pakistan and Ms. Claudia Keller from Germany. For Sub-Item 8E, the contact group was co-chaired by Ms. Uti Honkatukia from Finland and Mr. Zahir Fakir from South Africa. For Sub-Item 8F, the contact group was co-chaired by Mr. Carlos Fuller from Belize and Mr. Georg Borsting from Norway. I thank all the co-chairs for their hard work and I will now take up each agenda sub-item individually. I invite the CMA to consider agenda sub-item 8A, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance. I invite the CMA to adopt the draft decision entitled Matters Relating to the Standing Committee on Finance as contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L11. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. As parties will recall, consultations on this matter of the review of the functions of the Standing Committee on Finance was undertaken under my authority with groups and parties. Parties were unable to complete the consultations of this matter. Therefore, consideration of this matter will continue at CMA 4. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the CMA to consider agenda sub-item 8B, Guidance to the Green Climate Fund. I invite the CMA to adopt the draft decision entitled Guidance to the Green Climate Fund as contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L8. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the CMA to consider agenda sub-item 8C, Guidance to the Global Environment Facility, and the draft decision entitled Guidance to the Global Environment Facility contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L10. I propose the following amendment in paragraph 7 of the draft decision to replace the word review with consideration of the support provided to developing country parties, and replace the reference of paragraph number 38 to 42. This amendment will ensure consistency with the decision adopted under CMA agenda item 5. I now invite the CMA to adopt the draft decision as amended. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMA to consider agenda sub-item 8D, matters relating to the Adaptation Fund. I invite the CMA to adopt the draft decision entitled Matters Relating to the Adaptation Fund contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L7. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the CMA to consider agenda sub-item 8E, New Collective Quantified Climate Finance Goal. I invite the CMA to adopt the draft decision entitled New Collective Quantified Climate Finance Goal contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L17. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMA to consider agenda sub-item 8F, compilation and synthesis of and summary report on the in-session workshop on biennial communications of information related to Article 9, Paragraph 5 of the Paris Agreement. I invite the CMA to adopt the draft decision entitled Compilation and Synthesis of and Summary Report on the in-session workshop on biennial communications of information related to Article 9, Paragraph 5 of the Paris Agreement, contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/L9. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the CMA to consider agenda item 11, report of the Forum on the Impact of the Implementation of Response Measures. This item was considered by the SUBSTA and the SBI. I thank the chairs of the SUBSTA and the SBI and parties for their hard work and for forwarding a recommendation to the CMA, following which I undertook further consultations. I now invite the CMA to adopt the draft decision entitled Matters Relating to the Forum on the Impact of the Implementation of Response Measures, contained in document FCCC/PA/2021/L6/Rev 1. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Colleagues, as proposed during the opening plenary of the CMA, I appointed a senior member of my delegation, COP26 envoy John Merton, to conduct informal consultations on the special needs and special circumstances of Africa. During these consultations, which were undertaken under my initiative and responsibility and without prejudice to their outcome, many parties and group of parties, including the African Group, the Independent Association for Latin America and the Caribbean, for Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Alliance of Small Island States, elaborated on their own vulnerability to the adverse effects of climate change. A range of views were expressed on the specific issue of the special needs and special circumstances of Africa. It is clear that there is no consensus on this issue at this time. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Dear delegates, please stay in your seats as we will be convening the COP immediately. The 12th meeting of the CMA is suspended. I now resume the 12th meeting of COP26. I now invite the conference to consider Agenda Item 7, Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage Associated with Climate Change Impacts. As proposed at the opening plenary, I requested Ambassador Nick Bridge to undertake the consultations on this matter, jointly with the governance element of the Warsaw International Mechanism under CMA Agenda Item 7. Whilst considerations related to the governance of the Warsaw International Mechanism will continue at the next session, parties were able to reach a solution that will enable the critical work of the Warsaw International Mechanism to continue progress. I now invite the COP to adopt the draft decision entitled Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage Associated with Climate Change Impacts, contained in document FCCC/2021/CP/L15. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the COP to consider Agenda Item 6, Report of the Adaptation Committee for 2019, 2020 and 2021. At the first meeting of the COP, I outlined that this item would be considered by the SBSTA and the SBI. I also referred to the SBSTA and the SBI the review of the progress, effectiveness and performance of the Adaptation Committee. I thank the chairs of the SBSTA and the SBI for forwarding their recommendations to the COP, following which I undertook further consultations on this matter. I now invite the COP to adopt the draft decision entitled Report of the Adaptation Committee for 2019, 2020 and 2021, contained in document FCCC/CP/2021/L11. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Election of members of the Adaptation Committee will be taken up at the conclusion of the COP. I would now invite the COP to consider Agenda Item 8, Matters Relating to Finance. For sub-item 8A and F, a contact group was established, co-chaired by Mr. Georg Borsting from Norway and Mr. Carlos Fuller from Belize. For sub-item 8B, a contact group was established, co-chaired by Mr. Gard Linseth from Norway and Mr. Richard Muyungi from Tanzania. For sub-items 8C and D, a contact group was established, co-chaired by Ambassador Diane Black-Lane from Antigua and Barbuda and Mr. Toru Sugio from Japan. For sub-item 8E, a contact group was established, co-chaired by Eva Schroeder from the Netherlands and Daniela Veas from Chile. I thank all the co-chairs for their hard work. I will now take up each agenda sub-item individually. I invite the COP to consider agenda sub-item 8A, long-term climate finance. I invite the COP to adopt the draft decision entitled Long-Term Climate Finance as contained in document FCCC/2021/L14. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to consider agenda sub-item 8B, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance. I invite the COP to adopt the draft decision entitled Matters Relating to the Standing Committee on Finance as contained in document FCCC/CP/2021/L9. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. On review of the functions of the SCF, as parties will recall, consultations on this matter were undertaken under my authority with groups and parties. Parties were unable to complete the consultations of this matter. Therefore, consideration of this matter will continue at COP27. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to consider sub-item 8C, report of the Green Climate Fund to the Conference of the Parties and guidance to the Green Climate Fund for 2020 and 2021. I now invite the COP to adopt the decision entitled Report of the Green Climate Fund to the Conference of the Parties and guidance to the Green Climate Fund, contained in document FCCC/2021/L6. I propose an amendment, namely to remove the footnote remove footnote 4 in paragraph 6 of the draft decision. I now invite the COP to adopt the draft decision as amended. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to consider sub-item 8D, report of the Global Environment Facility to the Conference of the Parties and guidance to the Global Environment Facility for 2020 and 2021. I now invite the COP to adopt the decision entitled Report of the Global Environment Facility to the Conference of the Parties and guidance to the Global Environment Facility contained in document FCCC/CP/2021/L8. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to consider sub-item 8E, seventh review of the financial mechanism. Parties were unable to complete their consideration of this matter. Therefore, consideration of this matter will continue at COP27. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to consider sub-item 8F, compilation and synthesis of and summary report of the in-session workshop on biennial communications of information related to Article 9, paragraph 5 of the Paris Agreement. I now invite the COP to adopt the decision entitled Compilation and Synthesis of and Summary Report on the in-session workshop on biennial communications of information related to Article 9, paragraph 5 of the Paris Agreement, contained in document FCCC/2021/L7. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to consider agenda item 12, report of the Forum on the impact of the implementation of response measures. This item was considered by the SUBSTA and the SBI. I thank the chairs of the SUBSTA and the SBI and parties for their hard work and for forwarding a recommendation to the COP, following which I undertook further consultations. I now invite the COP to adopt the draft decision entitled matters relating to the Forum on the impacts of the implementation of response measures contained in document FCCC/2021/L4 to FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/L2. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite delegates to consider sub-agenda item 2D, election of officers other than the President. Item 6, report of the Adaptation Committee. Agenda as item 8B, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance. Item 9, development and transfer of technology, and item 10, capacity building under the Convention. I would like to inform parties that consultations on the nominations for election have been concluded and nominations received for election to bodies under the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. I would like to thank Vice President Tariq for continuing these consultations. I would also like to thank all chairs and coordinators of regional groups and constituencies for their active and constructive engagement in the consultations. The list of nominations received by the Secretariat is available on the UNFCCC website. I now invite the COP to elect to its Bureau the following members as Vice President. Mr. Ibrahim Mipwa Shetima of Zambia, Ms. Gabriela Fischerova of Slovakia, Mr. Carlos Fuller of Belize, Mr. Javier Antonio Guterres Ramirez of Nicaragua, and Ms. Anne Rasmussen of Samoa. As substitute chair, Mr. Tosi Mpanu of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. As SBI chair, Ms. Marianne Carlsen of Norway. And as rapporteur, Ms. Irina Stavchuk of Ukraine. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I would like to congratulate the members of the Bureau on their election. I would also like to express appreciation to the previous Bureau members under whose guidance and leadership we have made tremendous progress during the past 2 years, especially their guidance for the organization and the work of the conference. I note that nominations are outstanding from the Asia-Pacific Group. I invite the Asia-Pacific Group to continue consultations and submit the outstanding nominations to the Secretariat as soon as possible and by the 28th of February 2022 at the latest. Once received by the Secretariat, the nominees will be deemed elected at COP26 in accordance with established practice.
Well, there we go. There's obviously ongoing decisions and some emotion as well. I was really quite surprised by that. But joining me is Dr. Benny Pizer, Director of the Global Warming Policy Forum. And of course, I've still got Anaya here and Lembit. Benny, can you tell me something about what we've just heard? I mean, it's a little bit mysterious, all these subsection paragraph CCC.21. What are we actually hearing?
Well, the main agreement, as many people predicted, is rather a repetition of what we have been hearing in years. This is, as you know, the 26th COP, and we've had quite 26 agreements. This is the 26th agreement. And the main point why Alok Sharma almost cried is that the intention by the UK government and the Biden administration to get an agreement on phasing out coal, that they didn't achieve. The text was watered down 4 times to the final agreement, which basically even took out the word phase out of coal. It's now called phasing down. And not only has the language changed and made the agreement almost meaningless, but this phase down of coal is actually conditional on Western governments supporting developing countries. You know, India is requesting $1 trillion for that. So unless the West is actually paying much more than they have, and we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars per year, unless that money flows, and none of the countries will be actually sticking to any of these agreements. So the agreement, and that's why so many delegates have said they are deeply disappointed, because the agreement has been watered down near meaninglessness.
It was very strong condemnation there from both China, from Switzerland and the European Union.
Of the implications for constituted bodies of the proposal from Georgia.
I find it interesting that when you go to China and you get off a plane in Beijing, the first thing you smell is burning coal. Do you think the whole thing has been a waste of time?
Almost like, you know, the annual panto. We always have the kind of, it's the last chance to save the planet. You know, this was the 26th last chance. Next year, it will be the last chance. And the year after, it will be the last chance. It will always be the last chance. And then, of course, we go into the conference and there are the hopes of a big success. And then we have this kind of drama, the government's deadlocked and they have to go in overtime. And finally, we have an agreement. And I bet you tomorrow the Sunday papers, at least some of them will say, big success for Boris. Others will say, big defeat for Boris, because everyone will interpret this agreement completely differently. I mean, every government was keen to get an agreement, whether it's the Chinese or the Americans, the Indians or the UK government. Everyone is interested to have an agreement to go home and say, look, you know, we are actually making progress here. But if you read the small print, it is really not waste of time and money, but it is a repetition of empty rhetoric.
What do you make of it, Inai?
I mean, I do worry, is it not understandable, though, that countries like India and China and some major developing countries have essentially said that if you are going to put these kinds of huge targets on us, then you need of them economically in a difficult situation. And their priority is rapid political and economic development, lifting their tea. And therefore, if Western countries are going to put the kinds of pressure on them to not necessarily develop in the ways that actually Western countries got to their position in the first place, then I think it's understandable that they're saying, well, that's not very just. And not only that, we see Western societies demonizing other sources of energy, whether that's kind of fracking, shale gas to nuclear, which is a perfectly viable and reasonable option, and saying that actually you're going to have to provide energy using solar panels and wind farms, which are intermittent energy sources and aren't actually sufficient for economic development that these countries need. So I think that, you know, is it really surprising, do you think, that some of these countries have said, well, this isn't really fair?
No, it's not surprising at all. This divide between the green Western governments and the developing poor and emerging nations that are their main priority is raise billions out of poverty. This divide has always existed and continues to exist. And no matter how many agreements there are, it won't actually solve the real problem of the West not actually managing to come up with alternative forms of energy that are affordable for poorer countries. Poor countries will only adopt green technologies and green energy if they can afford it, if they are reliable and cost effective. And that is the major problem. The EU is beginning to realize that they have a problem. They are considering, believe it or not, to classify natural gas as a green energy, which is a bit ironic given that the agreement just said we should phase out ineffective fossil fuel subsidies. The EU is on the verge of making natural gas eligible for subsidies. And at the same time, they sign this agreement saying we want to phase out subsidies. But they're beginning to realize how important natural gas and nuclear energy is. So the developing countries will simply do what they've always done. They will go their way. They will look at their main energy requirements. And unless we can come up with real alternatives that are cost effective, that can compete with these cheap fossil fuels, they will use cheap fossil fuels.
So do you think Greta Thunberg is right? Was this all an act of greenwashing?
Well, I'm afraid on this issue she is not far off, because she does realize that these rituals, these annual meetings, have had no impact whatsoever on CO2 emissions. CO2 emissions continue to rise. They will continue to rise for the next 10, 20, 30 years, no matter what agreements. As I said, unless you can come up with a real alternative to cheap fossil fuels, they will continue to go up. I think Greta Thunberg understands that governments are more interested in the rhetoric and how they look and what they can show the public than actually. The only mistake that she makes is that there could be a political will to change that. And in the absence of real alternatives to cheap fossil fuels, and unless you go big on nuclear, I don't know whether a green activist like Greta Thunberg is in favor of nuclear or shale gas, as was just mentioned. Unless you come up with real alternatives, CO2 emissions continue to go up.
Limbit, give us an MP's view. I mean, there did seem to be quite a lot of emotion within the conference there.
Yeah, I won't dwell on the fact that I think that CO2 isn't the key issue. Just let's park that for now and look at it from a political perspective. If I did believe CO2 was wrecking the environment, this COP26 has done nothing to stop it. Inaya and Benny have both summed it up, because as soon as you say phase down, you take away any target at all. And you can do whatever you want with coal. And let's remember, we've exported our emissions to places like China because we buy the products from there. So we can blame them for making the emissions, but these are our emissions. And no one seems to be talking about that. From an MP's point of view, it seems to me like this. There is a general zeitgeist that there's a climate emergency. Very few politicians in Britain would speak up, as I have, and say it's wrong, even if they thought that privately, because it's just an uncomfortable place to be. So what we're seeing here is virtue signaling. I think that, to my amazement, I'm actually agreeing with Benny, less surprising. Inaya, also less surprising, but Greta Thunberg, she is right. This is a talking shop. And if you don't have binding targets, you don't have anything. Just in terms of the £1 trillion that or was it $1 trillion? I can't remember which bit that India wants. Of course they want it, and they actually deserve it. Because why should they be punished just because they came into the Industrial Revolution later than we did? So if we're actually serious about this, then we actually have to accept as well, we've got to pick up the tab to the third world if we don't want them to become the first world with all the emissions that go with it.
Yeah. So, Benny, where do we go from here? What hope is there for the environment?
There's big hope. There's always hope for COP27. That will solve it. Next year will be our really last chance. And believe you me, next year we will solve all these problems. So fingers crossed, and COP27 will be the best last chance. I mean, I'm a bit sarcastic here, but basically it's always the next COP that will solve these issues. And of course they won't. Let's face it, governments have to realize that in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we will have to live with extreme weather events, whether it's drought, whether it's flood, whether it's sea level rise, whether it's heat waves, cold snaps. These extreme weather events have always happened, and they will continue to happen.
I'm going to have to interrupt you there.
Continue to happen.
We're going to go back to the conference because I think things are drawing to a conclusion. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
I also thank all who are part of the UK presidency team. I'm sorry I cannot name you all. You're a lot, very strong team, fantastic team. The teams, all of them, from mobilization and operations to those working shifts throughout the night to keep the agenda moving forward. It has been a unique COP, given everything we've gone through, and you have all risen to the challenge. And also, thank you to the people of Glasgow for their warmth and graciousness and for opening the doors to this beautiful city, the focus of the world's attention these last 2 weeks. One hears many things at the COP, and here is one of the things I heard most. The people here are so nice. It truly warmed our hearts. Finally, I would like to thank everyone at UN Climate Change for their incredible dedication, passion, and support for COP26. This has been, as I just said, a very unique COP. Regardless of the multiple challenges every one of you have faced, you have shown your exceptional professionalism and dedication. Thank you to all from the bottom of my heart. Dear friends, 2 weeks ago, I said in my opening remarks that success at COP26 was possible. I said it would be defined not by 1 or 2 big announcements, but whether we achieved a balanced package of decisions and actions. We started our work with a clear recognition that we are facing a climate crisis, and at the same time that there are critical gaps in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and finance. I believe that the recognition of the relevance and the urgency of the task ahead has allowed many of you to support the consensus, even if it did not completely address all your concerns. I thank you. We will be leaving Glasgow with clarity on the work we need to undertake to reach the 1.5-degree goal. Parties have made progress in several key areas. I want to highlight 4 accomplishments. There are many more, but 4 accomplishments that represent significant progress in the world's efforts against climate change. At this COP, adaptation has been central in all our conversations, and the texts adopted recognize this relevance. We now have a work program to define the global goal on adaptation. This will allow us to identify the collective needs and solutions for the climate impact already happening now in all regions of the world. And the Santiago Network, which provides technical support for countries to address and manage loss and damage, has now been enhanced, strengthening global efforts towards resilience. Regarding finance, an issue extensively discussed here at COP26, all parties agree that much more support needs to be provided to developing countries. In particular, parties have also recognized that the most vulnerable cannot be ignored, that much more finance for adaptation is needed, and it has to be predictable. We welcome the call to at least double finance for adaptation. We know the needs are still very much beyond what is currently available, and parties must continue to focus on this issue. Yes, we are disappointed that the 100 billion pledge remains outstanding, and I call upon all donors to please make it a reality as by next year. And we all know that this is not only about the 100 billion. Initiating the process for the definition of the new global goal on finance as soon as possible is therefore critical. We came into COP26 knowing we had a significant emissions gap, and to address it, parties have collectively agreed to look for ways to increase actions continuously with the overall objective of closing that gap. There can be no doubting the urgency of this task. This is a question of the long-term survival of humanity on this planet. COP26 also sees the finalization of guidelines for the full implementation of the Paris Agreement. This is a significant accomplishment. After 6 years of intense negotiations, we have reached a compromise on the pending issue of Article 6. Operationalizing Article 6 will allow parties to scale up their cooperation, mobilize additional finance and private sector engagement, and ensure that the rules are the same for everyone. We also finalized the negotiations on the enhanced transparency framework. This will allow all parties to continue building trust. Dear friends, at COP26, parties built a bridge between good intentions and measurable actions to lower emissions, increase resilience, and provide much-needed finance. A bridge leading to the historic transformation we must make to achieve rapid reductions this decade and ultimately towards the 1.5-degree goal. A bridge between the admirable promises made 6 years ago in Paris to the concrete measures that the science calls for and societies around the world demand. This was clear outside of the formal process as well. We heard pledges to protect forests, oceans, land, and nature. We heard more pledges for adaptation, more action in the healthcare sector. We've heard promises for greater inclusion of indigenous, regional, and local communities. We heard from the activists who marched in peace and pled for you to listen to their cries for climate leadership. We heard from women. We heard from youth, from cities, from regions, from businesses, large and small, for academics, scientists, and countless others. And here we have our two champions, the champion from Chile, champion from the UK, Nigel Topping and Gonzalo Munoz. Thank you very much. It was actually very, very exciting, the program, the things that you organized there in the action area. Now, for every announcement made, we look forward to firm plans and the fine print. But, dear friends, the road to climate action does not end in Glasgow. Despite your accomplishments, we are still far off the trajectory of stabilizing global temperature rise at 1.5 degrees. It's imperative we see more climate action this decade to achieve it. The emissions gap remains a serious threat, as do the gaps in finance and adaptations. NDCs must be significantly boosted. As the Secretary General said, every country, city, company, and financial institution must credibly and verifiably reduce their emissions and decarbonize their portfolios starting now. We must continue to work together to achieve it. Thousands of non-governmental observers have come to this conference. All have a voice. These participants were, are, and will continue to be more than a source of inspiration. They are a source of solutions. I call upon parties to make a greater commitment to include observers in our process moving forward. I have already made a commitment to them to review what has been their engagement in the process so far, the experiences over the years, and then reflect on how we can ensure greater inclusivity moving forward. That work will begin immediately. Dear friends, some of the oldest and most magnificent bridges in the world can be found here in Scotland. It is therefore fitting that the bridge to historic transformation we must achieve has been built here in Glasgow. But bridges are meant to be crossed, and cross we must. The waters of the climate emergency are rising rapidly. We must continue to fight for hope. And while hope will light our way forward, we will remain vigilant that promises pledged and are promises kept, that the billions looking to you have their hopes reflected in your decisions. I once again thank all of you for making COP26 a success and for working so hard. Let us enjoy what we have accomplished, but let us also prepare for the next chapter of our journey together with Egypt in beautiful Sharm el-Sheikh. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
I think Saudi Arabia would like to make an intervention. Saudi Arabia?
No, thank you, Chair. We're waiting for the floor to be open.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Patricia. So, dear friends, after 2 years of incredibly hard work, we have our Glasgow Climate Pact. And this is down to each and every one of you and your teams, your hard work, your dedication, your willingness to build consensus. And I thank you all and your teams for your extraordinary, and I would say heroic efforts. And I also want to thank my own incredible team for the past 2 years and all the work that has gone into making this conference happen. I also thank them for putting up with me. Could we have a round of applause for the UK team? I also thank our observers, civil society, and young people for keeping up the pressure, for constantly reminding us that communities around the world expected us to deliver here in Glasgow. Thank you. And I, of course, thank those most climate vulnerable parties who never let us forget what is at stake. parties whose people are already suffering the worst effects of climate change and whose moral authority has powered this process forward. Together, over these 2 weeks, parties have demonstrated what the world had come to doubt: that countries can rise above their differences to unite against a common challenge, and that this multilateral process can deliver. Now, I know that some parties, many of you, have sacrificed wording that you held dear for the sake of a balanced outcome, and I thank you for doing so. Just as I thank parties that have held their nerve under pressure so that we can deliver a strong final text. I think we can all be proud of what collectively we have delivered. The decisions we have adopted are part of a broader package, which includes what we have achieved together outside these negotiating halls on nationally determined contributions, on adaptation plans and finance pledges, not to mention our coalitions on coal and forests and cars, and of course, the work of the brilliant high-level champions. Taken together, this package charts a course for the world to deliver on the promises made in Paris. This Glasgow Climate Pact drives action on adaptation. It emphasizes the need to act. It sets a clear way forward on the global goal on adaptation, and it urges developed countries to at least double their collective climate finance for adaptation by 2025. It operationalizes the Santiago network on loss and damage, finally giving that issue the focus and attention it deserves. It commits to urgently scale up finance, which is the foundation for faster action and confidence that we can go further. And it sets out actions to empower and engage all of society in driving forward this transition. Collectively, we have acknowledged that a gulf remains between short-term targets and what is needed to meet the Paris temperature goal. And so our pact brings parties back to the table next year to improve their commitments, to drive up ambition across this vital decade. And it emphasizes the urgent need to accelerate our efforts to turn targets into actions to keep 1.5 within reach. And that work must start now. We have also, for the first time, adopted text to scale up clean power and phase down dirty coal. And after no less than 6 years of discussions, friends, we have concluded on those final parts of the Paris Agreement rulebook on Article 6, on common timeframes, and on transparency. And these put in place the rules and systems to keep us accountable and support increased ambition. Their resolution will unleash the full force of what was agreed in Paris. This is real progress in keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. Progress that we have made together. But the need for continual action and implementation to match ambition must continue throughout this decade. I think today we can say with credibility that we have kept 1.5 degrees within reach, but its pulse is weak. And it will only survive if we keep our promises, if we translate commitments into rapid action, and if we deliver on the expectations set out in this Glasgow Climate Pact to increase ambition to 2030 and beyond, and if we close the vast gap that remains, as we must. Because as Prime Minister Mia Mottley told us at the start of this conference, for Barbados and other small island states, she said, 2 degrees is a death sentence. Friends, it is up to all of us to sustain our lodestar of keeping 1.5 degrees within reach, to continue our efforts to get finance flowing and boost adaptation. After the collective dedication which has delivered the Glasgow Climate Pact, our work here cannot be wasted. The drive towards 1.5 for a cleaner, healthier, more prosperous and more resilient world must continue, and we must continue that together. At the start of this summit, the world was asking, quite rightly, do the parties assembled here in Glasgow have the courage to rise to the scale of the challenge? Well, my friends, you have responded. We have responded. History has been made here in Glasgow. And what we now need to ensure that the next chapter charts the success of the commitments that we have solemnly made together in the Glasgow Climate Pact. Thank you.